came from Paris, the other from Munich, and one at JFK, which came from Dubai, and one which landed in Perpignan, France, from Oran, Algeria. And this is similar to the false missile alerts from Hawaii and then Japan less than a week later. Yeah, it could have just been a coincidence, but the odds are incredibly small that it was. And I mean so small that to call it a coincidence at that point is largely naive. And we have the same issue with these infected passengers on the planes. I mean, on September 5th, the infected plane from Dubai first landed at JFK. And shortly after that, on the same day, the flight into France from Oran, Algeria occurred. And then it was the next day, September 6th, that two planes flew into the city of Philadelphia on the same day, both infected. Now, as far as the JFK flight and one of the Philadelphia flights, there is a common link here. On the JFK flight from Dubai, there were two people who were infected with a virulent form of a type A influenza. And one of them, who was deathly ill with pneumonia, had another respiratory virus on top of all of that. And there was a third person with a cold, and all three of those people had been on the Hajj to Mecca, which brought roughly 2 million people, like I said, to Mecca this year. So that many people in such a crowded place, it's easy to see how illnesses and diseases can spread. And then on both flights into Philadelphia, there were 12 passengers total that reported flu-like symptoms, but only one passenger had been returning home from the Hajj. Meanwhile, the flight that landed in France from Algeria was thought to be infected with cholera, and that's perhaps the most terrifying of all of these, just because of how infectious and deadly cholera can be. I mean, there was only one child that was exhibiting symptoms, but it's not as much of a surprise as you might think when it's coming from Algeria. But quick tangent, this Reuters bit is pretty funny because they tell you that cholera has been ruled out, but then they say doctors found the 8-year-old boy was not infected, and then they don't tell you what was actually wrong, but they still mention the boy was vomiting and had the runs. That's not normal for a child to have both of those symptoms at the same time and to not be infected with anything. So I don't buy it. I mean, maybe it was just the flu or something and they're trying to keep it hush hush, but it was only last month that Algeria had their first outbreak of cholera in 22 years. But with a disease as infectious and vicious as cholera, if it were spreading in a part of the world that's uneducated, also making it significantly more likely to be incapable of defending against a real cholera outbreak, this could be devastating. At least Algeria seems to be able to identify it as being from bacteria in a specific river. But, I mean, on the whole, the mainstream media's coverage of this France story in particular is very shady because it has the potential to be the most disastrous if it turns out to be true, and they really come up short in a proper explanation of what happened. And another thing to ask is, who's screening people in Algeria who want to come to the US or any other nation for that matter? I mean, the articles that I read about it put the responsibility on the passengers, not anyone screening people at airports. Not to mention, you can see Spain up here for reference and Algeria on the bottom of the screen in case you're unsure where Algeria is. And France is connected to Spain on the northern bit, so it wasn't a particularly long flight, but Oran is the place the flight originated from, and the markers placed in the province where the cholera outbreak originated. So you can see that they're not that far apart. I mean, there's roughly 175 to maybe 200 miles between them. And when you consider how much people move and how infectious cholera is, I can absolutely see it moving that far in just a couple weeks, never mind a month. And on top of all of this infection scare, there were also 4 Southwest flights that may have come in contact with the measles, but it seems that that's fully contained in the state of Texas. And that's not really anything to worry about anyways. If you wanted something to truly be worried about, for less than $300, someone can get a ticket from the origin of the cholera outbreak to Paris. And like I said, I have a hard time believing that the screening process for all of this is airtight, seeing as a child clearly exhibiting symptoms of cholera made it into France. But I'd also say that this feels like a dry run for something more large scale because only one person from one of the Philadelphia flights was returning from the Hajj, but 12 people between the two flights were sick. Plus, the flight from Dubai into JFK in New York City had 3 people infected with the flu and other respiratory illnesses, and they were from the Hajj, but 10 people were hospitalized, even though it says there were dozens of infected passengers. Now, that's a 14-hour flight. If someone has the flu and you're infected from them, it's like a day or two before you start to feel sick, and it can potentially be up to 4 days before symptoms even surface. So it's not 14 hours. A lot of these people were not on the Hajj and were probably not infected on the plane. This was something that took root beforehand if it's the flu. This is only if it's the flu, but if it's something that the media is trying to suppress that could be more disastrous, like some of the more deadly and contagious respiratory illnesses from the Middle East, then, it might show symptoms sooner. I don't know. People on the flight were saying that at least half of the economy class was sick, and by the end of the flight, the bathroom was basically unusable. So that should give you some idea of the severity of this illness and about how many people were infected. So this is all very strange, and I'd avoid airplanes and airports for quite a while if I were you. And it's not just because of these flights, because by this criteria, to not get sick, you just stay away from places where people might be flying back from the Hajj, and you stay away from places where there are cholera outbreaks. The concern in this is that I fail to see this as an accident or a coincidence. I mean, if the threat level would just stay the same, then I'd be fine with flying. I'd tell you to not even worry about it. But the reason that I'm doing this video is because this isn't adding up to me. I'm not sure what's coming or if anything is coming at all, but the people responsible for controlling this narrative are allowing just waves of suspicion to flow over them by leaving unanswered gaps to necessary parts of this story. So that's really all for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't.